government. Ahead of the strikes, President Nicolás Maduro told state TV he's open to talking to the U.S. on drug trafficking, oil, and migration issues. The Trump administration has accused Maduro of being aligned with drug cartels and gangs designated by the U.S. as terrorist organizations. The Trump administration has spent months ramping up pressure on the Maduro regime. Last month, President Trump ordered a blockade of sanctioned oil tankers entering and leaving Venezuela. The massive military buildup of 15,000 American troops in the Caribbean includes 11 Navy ships led by the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier. Marines aboard the USS Iwo Jima have been conducting live-fire exercises, and stealth fighter jets have been deployed to Puerto Rico. On Monday, President Trump confirmed the first known U.S. strike inside Venezuela, saying an alleged drug-related site was targeted.
They load the boats up with drugs, so we hit all the boats, and now we hit the area.
But he did not confirm reports that the CIA carried out that strike.
Well, I don't want to say that. I know exactly who it was, but I don't want to say who it was.
This week, there were also more deadly strikes on alleged drug boats off the coast of Venezuela. That brought the total to more than 30 strikes on vessels, killing at least 115. For weeks, Democratic lawmakers and even some Republicans have questioned the strategy.
It's a completely made up and false sense that we're at war, we can do whatever we want, but if Congress wants to vote on it, no, we're not at war.
And lawmakers on Capitol Hill, even allies of the president, have said they want more information from the administration about what comes next and the end game. Senator Mike Lee of Utah New this morning on social media posted that he had a conversation with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who told him Maduro was arrested to stand trial on criminal charges in the United States and that the military action was deployed to protect and defend those executing the arrest warrant overnight. We are expecting to hear many more details from the president himself. A news conference is scheduled for 11 a.m. Eastern at Mar-a-Lago. Michael.
And we will be keeping tabs on that. Natalie in West Palm Beach, thank you. Well, here's a closer look at Nicolás Maduro. Venezuela's leader has been in power since 2013. Now, the U.S. does not formally recognize Maduro as the head of state and hasn't for years. Maduro was charged with narco-terrorism and corruption back in 2020, and there was a reward for $50 million for his arrest. Now, the State Department warned U.S. citizens in Venezuela to shelter in place this morning, and the U.S. Embassy in Colombia is warning Americans not to travel to Venezuela. For more, let's go to Lilia Luciano, who joins us from the Dominican Republic. Lilia, good morning.
Good morning to you, Michael. The situation in Venezuela right now could turn very volatile. I have been hearing reports from people who are truly afraid that any expression of support or even sharing the videos of these strikes that they themselves documented could make them a target of the regime. So far, since these strikes took place, we have heard from the Minister of Defense in Venezuela, who declared a state of emergency, a state of exception. He said that every military force in Venezuela will be deployed across the land. At the same time, he's calling for people to not fall into anarchy or chaos. The Minister of, it's an odd name, but a popular Minister of Justice, basically the de facto second or third most powerful person in Venezuela, Diosdado Cabello, also spoke out and called for calm. But people in Venezuela who have been under this regime for decades understand that at a moment like this, any expression of support for the actions of the United States could be very dangerous. That's why that message is going out to U.S. or even, or other ally citizens in the country to be very careful. I have interviewed people very recently who are allied and supportive of the regime, and they say we are willing to fight. We're willing to give up our lives if we have to support this regime. There may be an expectation that because there is an opposition that won an election last year, according to the voter tallies that they presented, to the evidence that they presented, and have been acknowledged by the international community as the legitimate government of Venezuela, That doesn't mean that this will be an easy transition. There are armed groups, there are armed guerrillas, and the government of Colombia, I spoke yesterday with the Minister of Defense of Colombia, which is, borders Venezuela. The government of Colombia is deploying their military to the border to both deal with any possible migration crisis that could emerge now after what happened last night because of the bombings or the taking of Maduro, or because they fear that those armed groups, the armed guerrillas, in particular the ELN from Colombia, which has been historically allied with forces in Venezuela, could retaliate. So it's a very dynamic situation. The opposition has not wanted to say anything. They have not responded to my request for comment yet. I assume they're waiting to hear from President Trump. But it's moving fast.
It is indeed. Lilia Luciano, thank you so much for your reporting. I've been following it all. CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd joins us now. She served as former Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism at the Department of Homeland Security. Sam, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. So how precedented is a move like this from the U.S., and should Congress have been involved in the decision to do it?
Well, the Trump administration has said for several months that they don't need congressional authority to engage in military strikes against alleged drug smugglers. They have cited the president's constitutional authority as commander-in-chief of the U.S. Army and Navy under Article 2 of the Constitution, whereas many others have cited Article 1 of the Constitution and Congress's inherent responsibility to declare war. So that's a legal issue that's outstanding. But at the same time, Congress will be responsible, of course, for approving any funds that will be needed for further deployments in and around Venezuela and any stabilization needs on the ground, not to mention the precedent of a president invading another country, engaging in these strikes, and exfiltrating a foreign leader absent congressional authority. That's a checks and balances issue with serious repercussions going forward. There is precedent. Back in the 80s, the United States, for example, did capture via Delta forces the leader of Panama and bring him back to the United States to stand trial. So there is some precedent there, Adriana.
Well, Sam, Utah Senator Mike Lee says Secretary of State Marco Rubio expects no further action in Venezuela now that Maduro is in custody. But even if the White House is saying this is over, how will Venezuela react to this? And should Americans be concerned about possible escalation or retaliation?
Well, I don't think there will be one reaction by Venezuela. Venezuelans are not a monolithic entity. Instead, what we have to wait and see, and what we just don't know, is whether there have been any conversations through covert channels, for example, with members of Maduro loyalists to talk to them about de-escalation and leaving power, and or any conversations with opposition leaders about stepping in to run the country. Under the Venezuelan Constitution, ostensibly the vice president should take over. But what we don't know, again, if there have been discussions about who is going to run Venezuela now that Maduro is gone, whether with Maduro loyalists, with the opposition, and or with neighboring countries like Colombia, like others, who could be critical in helping to instill a sense of calm and stabilization in an incredibly chaotic situation.
And Sam, what was your reaction when you saw the news that Maduro was in custody? And if you could imagine, what it was like behind the scenes, how complex is an operation like this?
Well, I think certainly many breathed a sigh of relief that Maduro's reign of human rights abuses, democratic backsliding, narcotics trafficking, and more are over. At the same time, this was an incredibly complicated military operation, likely with a broad range of military assets backed up by seriously good intelligence on Maduro's whereabouts. So kudos to the folks that pulled it off. But it is truly mind-boggling that the United States launched this operation in Venezuela without congressional authorization, without a UN Security Council resolution. And that does open up a Pandora's box when it comes to precedent going forward. So while Maduro was an illegitimate leader doing very bad things, this was an unprecedented operation, and without the right follow-through could lead to a more chaotic situation than currently exists.
And Sam, where do you think that the U.S. would take Maduro?
They could take him a number of places, Adriana. I think that ultimately the goal is to have him stand trial in the United States. He was indicted in 2020 on a range of narcotics and other charges. But behind the scenes, ostensibly, there's a law enforcement angle to this, where to take Maduro, where to have him stand trial. certainly what government will be functioning today now that Maduro is no longer there. And further, what happens to Venezuela's vast resources, its oil, its gold, its mineral deposits, and other matters. And so those behind the scenes conversations, that wargaming, Adriana, not the military side, but the stabilization side, oftentimes accompanies the discussions and the wargaming on the actual military operation. We just don't know what's happened in that regard. And we hope to hear more about that from the president this morning.
All right, Sam Vinograd, thanks so much for joining us. And we want to turn now to Ed O'Keefe, our senior White House and political correspondent. He is in our Washington newsroom. Ed, I know you've been talking with your White House sources all morning. What are you hearing in Washington?
Well, Michael, just keep in mind the president has been saying for months that this kind of attack or operation inside Venezuela was possible. And we know, or CBS News has learned, that the president had given the green light to conduct land strikes in Venezuela at some point here in recent days before this actual operation occurred. Part of the issue in recent days has been the weather. There was authority to do this as early as Christmas Day, but there were actually U.S. military operations that day against ISIS targets in Nigeria, and so the focus shifted to that and then back to Venezuela. And for several days now, there have been concerns about the weather, and now we understand why. It was if it was that they had to go in and capture Maduro and his wife and bring them out, then perhaps, yes, you needed clear skies and favorable weather conditions to do that. And so that gives you a sense of how long the White House and the Pentagon have been preparing for this. What's telling, too, is the fact that he says here law enforcement operations or law enforcement was involved. As you've been discussing with Sam and Natalie and Lilia, the idea now that he would be brought to the United States to face the charges he was indicted on back in 2020 mirrors what happened 35 years ago today, when the Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega was arrested in Panama and brought to the United States to face drug trafficking charges. Maduro faces similar ones. And should it go similar to the way it did for Noriega, then Maduro would face charges here, could be found guilty, serve time here in the United States while a new political process plays out in Venezuela. And we'll hear later whether that's exactly what the president wants. And if indeed, as Secretary Rubio is apparently telling Republican lawmakers this morning, the military aspect of this is over.
So, Ed, some lawmakers in Congress have been in support of this. Others on both sides of the aisle are concerned about whether it's legal. What political ramifications might this have for the president, both in Congress and among the American public?
Well, we've been polling this, Adriana, for several months now, and it's telling how deeply skeptical the country is about this across partisan lines. Consider 73% said in a CBS News poll just last month the president needs to explain what's going on in Venezuela. When we asked about it in November, 70% said they'd oppose military action against the country. 3/4 said the administration hadn't clearly explained why military action is necessary. And 3 in 4 said the president would need congressional approval before taking military action in Venezuela, including a majority of Republicans, which is why you saw this morning several of them on social media at least express concerns about this. But we're also seeing the Secretary of State calling around to some of his former Republican colleagues in the Senate, at least, Mike Lee, Tom Cotton, head of the Intelligence Committee, to say, this is why we did it. This is why we believe it was legal or constitutional. We'll see whether they stand by them in the coming hours, depending on what the president says later.
Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much. And stay with CBS News. We will bring you President Trump's news conference live later this morning, right here on CBS and on our streaming network, CBS News 24/7.
Well, state television in Iran is reporting on the U.S. attack on Venezuela this morning. You'll recall that Iran, which has been targeted by U.S. airstrikes last June, has been close to Venezuela. Anti-government protests there are escalating, leaving at least 8 people dead. Demonstrators first took to the streets nearly a week ago in frustration over the dire state of the country's economy. And early yesterday morning, President Trump weighed in on social media. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said if Iran, quote, violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue. For the very latest, let's go to Haley Ott in London. Haley, good morning.
Good morning. Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said this morning in an apparent response to Mr. Trump's threats that Iran, quote, will not yield to the enemy. Social media is our lens to see these protests because journalists aren't allowed anywhere near them. Demonstrations at over 100 locations in Iran, rights groups say, including marches with crowds chanting anti-government slogans, cars set on fire, and gunshots. Beginning this past week, they're the largest protests in Iran since 2022, sparked by economic issues. The editor of the independent news site Iran Wire is Maziar Bahari.
People are dissatisfied with this government. People dissatisfied with the economic mismanagement. People are dissatisfied because of the fact that they don't have the freedom to express themselves.
Yesterday, Iran's parliamentary speaker responded to Mr. Trump's threat to intervene, saying, quote, all American centers and forces across the entire region will be legitimate targets for us in response to any potential adventurism. But with no change in the U.S. military posture in the region, it's unclear what President Trump's support for the protesters might actually involve. For Bahari, Mr. Trump's words are already having an effect.
I think many Iranian people will be inspired by that, have been inspired by that. And also that the message has made the Iranian regime more careful about its actions and using violence against people.
Iran's government this morning condemned the U.S. operation in Venezuela. Bahari told me that most Iranian protesters don't expect any sort of American intervention there for regime change, but that the government will take Mr. Trump's threats more seriously now. Adriana.
Haley Ott, thank you so much.
All right, coming up, the busiest travel period in history is almost over, but not before some wild weather gets in the way. We'll tell you what to expect.
Then the latest on that deadly New Year's Eve fire at a popular ski resort bar in Switzerland. What we are learning about the cause, and President Trump is about to address the nation after announcing the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. The authoritarian leader and his wife were captured by U.S. forces overnight following strikes on military facilities in Caracas, the country's capital. The strikes happened around 2 a.m. local time and followed months of U.S. military buildup in the region. President Trump targeted the South American nation over Maduro and his alleged ties to drug cartels. Trump said Maduro is on his way to New York, where he and his wife will face drug and narco-terrorism charges. I want to bring in senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who's standing by. Ed, as we said at the top of this was something we've been talking about and expected for weeks now.
That's right, Jerika. The president himself has been channeling for weeks, if not months, that a potential operation inside Venezuela was possible, despite the fact that he'd been in conversation with the Venezuelan leader at different times. And CBS News can report that the authority for this operation had been given around Christmas time, but that concerns about the weather over Venezuela had delayed it for several days. The president confirmed that earlier this morning in an interview with another network, saying that they had to wait for the weather. There have been some questions as to why the delay, and now, given that the capturing of Maduro and his wife was not an element expected in advance, perhaps that's the explanation for needing the good weather. As you said, the president said this morning that Maduro and his wife have been taken to the USS Iwo Jima, which is part of this unprecedented military deployment across the Caribbean Sea that involves at least 11 major naval vessels. It is expected that Maduro and his wife will be taken then to the New York City area to face charges. There's an updated 25-page indictment released this morning by the Justice Department that in essence updates a 2020 indictment against Maduro and some of his other accomplices or alleged accomplices, and details charges of money laundering and helping move large quantities of cocaine between Mexico, Venezuela, Europe, the United States, and details the involvement of Maduro, his wife to some extent, one of his sons, and then others in the illicit trading of drugs and the funneling of money. Details operations including getting diplomatic passes for Mexican drug dealers to get to Venezuela to help move money. Those are all in the allegations that will come perhaps in this briefing at Mar-a-Lago and then in the coming days in a New York courtroom. The president is set to speak from his home in Florida, Mar-a-Lago, where he's been since before Christmas. We know the vice president arrived yesterday for meetings, and it appears it was also in anticipation of this. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kaine, also expected to be with the president. And of course, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Rubio especially is one that we know has been actively pushing and working with the president to make this happen. Rubio, as a senator from Florida, was was a strident critic of the Maduro government, so much so that he, in fact, required extra security from the Senate because of threats made against his life. So we'll see if Rubio himself speaks to this at all. This will be seen certainly as a big part of his own legacy as a public figure, and obviously someone with close ties there to that part of South Florida. But the president this morning confirming that capture, which is something we haven't seen really since 36 years ago, when the United States extracted Manuel Noriega from Panama and brought him to Miami to face drug charges. We've seen some this morning drawing parallels, saying that this operation now, very similar to what went on in Panama, but certainly those explosions overnight across Venezuela, part of what makes this so dramatic and is raising concerns among Democrats and Republicans about the legality of the moves made by the president.
And Maduro is arriving in New York's Hudson Valley later today on a U.S. military plane. As you mentioned, there are still a lot of questions about what exactly happened, how this was able to come to fruition, and also if there were any injuries on the ground. I know on that other network, the president mentioned he didn't think that anybody had been killed while capturing Maduro and his wife. Senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us on the phone, or he's actually there with us. Charlie, just talk to us about the buildup. I know that you had been reporting over the last several weeks in terms of coming to this day, where we're waiting now to hear from the president, the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as well as the Secretary of State.
Yeah, so Ed mentioned the weather, and my colleagues and I have been checking with the U.S. military for about 2 weeks, waiting for what was about to go down. When you're talking about the weather, you're not really caring about cloud cover if you're a pilot aiming for targets at 30,000 feet. But when you're that low level and you're performing an extraction, then cloud cover does matter, most importantly for force protection. You saw the number of explosions with those helicopters overhead, so I can give you some details. It was conducted by Delta Force, Army's Delta Force, these elite units, but the ride and the cover, the air transport, U.S. Army's 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, they call themselves the Night Stalkers. These are exactly the kind of teams that helped put SEALs in to extract Osama bin Laden. So these are the ones with the helicopters, the Chinooks that you saw, the Blackhawks, Little Birds, that are responsible for getting these elite units in and getting them out. And yes, President Trump said that a couple people were hit and one of the helicopters were hit, but everybody's okay. We're expecting to get more details either from him or from maybe Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth a little bit later in the day. We know that Joint Chiefs of Staff Dan Kaine was very involved in this operation, as well he should be and would be. Ed mentioned that Nicolás Maduro and his wife were transported to a ship. The ship in question is called the Iwo Jima. It's an amphibious ship, a Navy ship. It's got 2,000 Marines on there. It's kind of a mini carrier, so it can take helicopters. It can even take small jets for short takeoff and landings. So it's from there, as we understand, Nicolás Maduro and his wife were transported to the Iwo Jima, which is in the Caribbean, and then from there sent to New York. And we talk about that buildup, and we talked about, you and I for weeks have been talking about the U.S. military buildup. This is all about capacity and giving both the commander-in-chief and the defense secretary options. And you've got the Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, you've got F-18 fighter jets, you've got F-35 fighter jets that we've seen for ourselves in Puerto Rico, the Reaper drones, the helicopters, something like 12 warships in that region. This isn't just about a sort of military attack. A lot of it is psychological to bear pressure down on the Maduro regime, but it's also force protection. If you're going to send Delta Force as capable as they are themselves, you have to make sure that those forces are going to be protected. And I think when you saw some of those explosions, limited amounts of information, judging from the vision that we've seen, that would have been to suppress air defenses, to make sure that Venezuela wasn't able to attack in any meaningful way. Those helicopters, as you can see, going in very low and putting Delta Force agents on the ground. And as we understand it, they went into this compound. The CIA was involved in the intelligence, but not the operation. That was driven by Delta Forces themselves.
Charlie D'Agata, thank you for that explanation. I want to turn now to CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano, who has been monitoring the reaction out of Venezuela. Lily, I know that you recently interviewed Maria Corina Machado, the opposition leader, and she recently put out a statement saying the time for freedom is here. What more can you tell us about the reaction from inside Venezuela?
That's right, Jerika. This has been the message that Maria Corina Machado has been carrying all along, telling Venezuelans abroad, Venezuelans in exile, and Venezuelans in the country that this time would come and that they would know when it happened. In her message, Maria Corina says, we are prepared for a transition. She calls on Venezuelans to be vigilant and to create a massive movement around the world, wherever they are, to support this transition. The transition she talks about would be for Edmundo González Urrutia, who was the person who was elected president of Venezuela last year in August. The opposition showed the world the evidence, and the vast majority of the international community, the United Nations, have supported those results, have found that they were the reality of that election, that he won by nearly 70% of the vote. People know Maria Corina Machado. They might not be as familiar with Edmundo. Edmundo was the candidate who ran in her place when she was banned from the regime from running as president, but she is the leader of the opposition. In her message, she said to Venezuelans who are currently in our country, be ready to put into action what we will be communicating to you very soon through our official channels. Her team, Maria Corina Machado's press team, have made sure to build this official channel. What they are building, basically behind the scenes, has been what they consider to be the legitimate government of Venezuela that would be able to enter through some kind of transition. Now, I want to stress something that I heard from Venezuelans on the ground, from geopolitical experts, from military experts, from historians. There are comparisons to Panama, but Venezuela and Panama are very different countries. Venezuela is many, many times, 12 times bigger than Panama. There is resistance in Venezuela from colectivos. You can call them perhaps urban guerrillas or urban groups who are loyal to the Maduro regime, or to whatever we can call that regime at this point. There are Colombian guerrillas who are also allied to the regime, not to mention China, Russia, and Iran, who have supported the regime. But I do want to stress that this may not be as clean as an extraction as we might imagine. In Venezuela, the structures of power of the regime are still there. After Maduro was detained or was taken by the United States, we heard from the Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, who said that they're declaring a state of exception, basically a state of emergency, and deploying all of the armed forces of the country of Venezuela, which of course cannot compare to the armed forces of the United States, but they're saying that they're deploying them throughout the country. We heard from Diosdado Cabello, who is the regime's chief enforcer, who showed up in a video in the middle of the night with armor and a whole team of people around him. He is the most feared figure within Chavismo, within the regime, since throughout the time that Maduro has been in power. We also heard from Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, who is demanding that the United States provide a proof of life of Maduro and his wife. So what I'm trying to say here is that these people are not going to go down without a fight, and they still have a stronghold of power in Venezuela. They are the ones that have been carrying out the campaigns of imprisoning people, of disappearing political dissidents. So Maria Corina Machado has this very powerful message calling on people, but every expert and every person on the ground that I've been talking to is very concerned about what might follow, because you might have removed the head of this organization, but not the entire structure of power. And we still don't have guarantees that the military will, in fact, be, as Maria Corina Machado has called on them. She said in her message, we must immediately assume, or that Edmundo González must immediately assume his constitutional mandate to be recognized as commander-in-chief. We don't have any guarantee that the majority of the military, that the thousands of generals that are part of the Venezuelan armed forces will in fact recognize Edmundo González Urrutia as their president, as their commander-in-chief. So we have to pay close attention. And what I've heard from Venezuelans who support the opposition, Venezuelans in exile or Venezuelans abroad, even people who are part of the military, is the United States needs to continue putting pressure to support this transition for the government of the opposition to take power, because the Venezuelan regime, the official forces as they are now, won't just accept this without a fight. I've also interviewed recently members of the colectivos. The colectivos are these urban guerrillas that are very much loyal to the regime, and they're saying, one person I interviewed recently told me, I'm willing to give up my life to fight to maintain Chavismo in power.
Lilia Luciano, with that important information, what you're looking at right now is our first pictures of Nicolás Maduro on the Iwo Jima that the president noted he was being transferred on to get here to New York to face charges in that indictment. I want to bring in CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd. President Trump has said that these attacks on Venezuela were related to drugs. Was this a successful mission in that regard, or is it too soon to tell? And what does it say, too, that we're talking about an indictment that goes back to 2020?
Well, first off, what an incredible picture. This picture shows Nicolás Maduro in chains, blindfolded, on a ship after being captured by elite special forces. This picture is a proof of life, certainly, but this picture is also a message to others in Venezuela that have been indicted, that have been sanctioned, about ostensibly what their future could look like, and is a very powerful image in that regard. Now, as we wait for the president to speak, we are expecting him to say that this was about narco-terrorism. If that was the case, if this was about narco-terrorism, then the cleanup is not complete. Nicolás Maduro was indicted back in 2020 at the time, along with 14 other individuals. There are dozens of individuals and entities that have been indicted and sanctioned for narco-terrorism-related reasons. So if this is really about narco-terrorism, there are a range of other actions we could see unfold in the coming days, in the coming weeks, to bring individuals that have been charged and sanctioned to justice. And part of the conversations behind the scenes with those individuals may be about relinquishing power, giving themselves up to avoid a fate like Nicolás Maduro.
The president noted, too, this morning that while this is about, he said, getting the drugs off the streets and how it's impacting Americans here, he was asked about the oil. I mean, Venezuela has a lot of it, and he said that we will likely be involved in some kind of way. Talk to about how it complicates factors there.
Well, Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves. At its peak, Venezuela was contributing about 5% of global oil output. That figure is now infinitesimally smaller, less than 1%. The oil reserves in Venezuela, under a best-case scenario, are going to need years of revitalization and investment. They have suffered significantly under sanctions and have really declined because of lack of upkeep and other factors. So one of the outstanding questions is whether President Trump and the administration will look at, under certain circumstances, really based on who takes power next, lifting sanctions, lifting prohibitions on U.S. and international companies investing in and operating in Venezuela to help bring their oil fields back online in an efficient way, to revitalize their heavy industrial base. Venezuela, years ago, did contribute to steel and aluminum manufacturing, automobile manufacturing, agriculture accounted for a good portion of its economy. So one of the questions is not just who comes into power, but if that new government is friendly with the Trump administration, if sanctions and other prohibitions on doing business in Venezuela, investing in Venezuela, whether those prohibitions will be lifted. If that is the case, that will certainly have implications for businesses globally, and also importantly for the people of Venezuela who have suffered so much under the economic pressure inflicted by the Maduro regime, which has invited the sanctions and other prohibitions on doing business with, investing in Venezuela.
All right, Samantha Vinograd, thank you so much for your input there. I want to turn back now to senior White House political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. You know, the president campaigned and won on this idea of America first. What is the public perception as we're now involved in striking another country, as there's so many other world issues that we're involved in happening at this hour?
There is great skepticism and opposition to military operations in Venezuela based on polling that CBS News has done in the last 2 months. Go back to November, and you were looking at about 70% opposition to this kind of military action. 3 in 4 Americans, including most Republicans, believing that the president would have to seek congressional authority to do so. And a general sentiment expressed in the polling that not enough information had been shared with the American public as to why the U.S. was even conducting these operations at all. So let's see here in the coming minutes, and we're expecting the president soon. The White House does this sometimes, tells us he's coming and then takes a few more minutes, then tells us again he's coming, and we'll see if he does. Has to explain or begin to explain more broadly to the public, why was this necessary? Right. This reporter asked him back in October what would be the justification for this, and he said illegal immigration and the drug flow. He has alleged for a while, and he may do it again this morning, that Venezuela would open up its prisons and send its worst people to the United States. There's no evidence of widespread organized attempts to do that, but there certainly were hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans who came to the United States in undocumented ways in recent years, and of course that's been cut off over the course of the last year. As for the claims about illegal drugs, and certainly that is the subject of this 25-page indictment released today by the Justice Department, and this one essentially, to my reading of it, updates the one that was first issued in 2020, talks a lot about cocaine. Where most of Venezuela's cocaine goes is towards Europe, not to the United States. And critics and experts have said if you want to focus on illicit drugs going into the United States, you've got to focus primarily on Mexico for that, because that's where the fentanyl has been coming from. Regardless, there are accusations in this indictment that suggest he's been intimately involved in this. Look again at this photo, and maybe we should make it bigger for the viewer just for a second. This is a Nike tracksuit that the former president of Venezuela is wearing here, and you see him wearing either a visor or some kind of a blindfold. And the person standing here on the right appears to be wearing a DEA jacket, Drug Enforcement Agency. They would be involved, conceivably, in this, given the charges against Maduro. But this proof of life photo, already bouncing around social media, will be seen around the globe and certainly across Latin America. And to Sam's earlier point, will send a big message. We know, again, and we've talked about this, that he's headed towards the New York area, but not into New York City itself. He's being flown to an air facility in Orange County, New York, which is about 60 miles north of the city. It takes about an hour. The reason is because Orange County, New York, is in the southern district of New York, that prosecutorial geographic zone. And Kennedy and LaGuardia are in the eastern district to the right. But we're expecting the president here any moment from his home in Mar-a-Lago.
We are hearing, Ed, that he is entering the room at any moment now. That is the tea room at Mar-a-Lago, where he is expected to be joined by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, which you see right there. This is the president coming to the podium. I'm going to listen in to what he has to say. Here we go.
We appreciate you being here. Late last night and early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II. It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolás Maduro to justice. This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history. And if you think about it, we've done some other good ones, like the attack on Soleimani, the attack on al-Baghdadi, and the obliteration and decimation of the Iran nuclear sites just recently in an operation known as Midnight Hammer, all perfectly executed and done. No nation in the world could achieve what America achieved yesterday, or frankly, in just a short period of time. All Venezuelan military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military, working with U.S. law enforcement, successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night. It was dark. The lights of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have. It was dark and it was deadly. But captured along with his wife, Celia Flores, both of whom now face American justice. Maduro and Flores have been indicted in the Southern District of New York. It's Jay Clayton, for their campaign of deadly narco-terrorism against the United States and its citizens. I want to thank the men and women of our military who achieved such an extraordinary success overnight with breathtaking speed, power, precision, and competence. You rarely see anything like it. You've seen some raids in this country that didn't go so well. They were an embarrassment. If you look back to Afghanistan, or if you look back to the Jimmy Carter days, they were different days. We're a respected country again, like never before. These highly trained warriors operating in collaboration with U.S. law enforcement caught them in a very ready position. They were waiting for us. They knew we had many ships out in the sea. We were just sort of waiting. They knew we were coming. So they were in a ready, what's called a ready position. But they were completely overwhelmed and very quickly incapacitated. If you would have seen what I saw last night, you would have been very impressed. I'm not sure that you'll ever get to see it, but it was an incredible thing to see. Not a single American service member was killed, and not a single piece of American equipment was lost. We had many helicopters, many planes, many people involved in that fight. But think of that, not one piece of military equipment was lost, not one service member was, more importantly, killed. The United States military is the strongest and most fearsome military on the planet by far, with capabilities and skills our enemies can scarcely begin to imagine. We have the best equipment anywhere in the world. There's no equipment like what we have, and you see that even if you just look at the boats. You know, we've knocked out 97% of the drugs coming in by sea. 90%. Each boat kills on average, 25,000 people. We knocked out 97%. And those drugs mostly come from a place called Venezuela. We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in, and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious, because that's what we're all about. We want peace, liberty, and justice for the great people of Venezuela, and that includes many from Venezuela that are now living in the United States and want to go back to their country. It's their homeland. We can't take a chance that somebody else takes over Venezuela that doesn't have the good of the Venezuelan people in mind. We've had decades of that. We're not going to let that happen. We're there now, and what people don't understand, but they understand as I say this, we're there now, but we're going to stay until such time as the proper transition can take place. So we're going to stay until such time as we're going to run it, essentially, until such time as a proper transition can take place. As everyone knows, the oil business in Venezuela has been a bust, a total bust, for a long period of time. They were pumping almost nothing by comparison to what they could have been pumping and what could have taken place. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. And we are ready to stage a second and much larger attack if we need to do so. So we were prepared to do a second wave if we needed to do so. We actually assumed that a second wave would be necessary, but now it's probably not. The first wave, if you'd like to call it that, the first attack was so successful, we probably don't have to do a second, but we're prepared to do a second wave, a much bigger wave, actually. This was pinpoint, but we have a much bigger wave that probably won't have to do. This partnership of Venezuela with the United States of America, a country that everybody wants to be involved with because of what we were able to do and accomplish, will make the people of Venezuela rich, independent, and safe. And it will also make the many, many people from Venezuela that are living in the United States extremely happy. They suffered. They suffered. So much was taken from them. They're not going to suffer anymore. The illegitimate dictator Maduro was the kingpin of a vast criminal network responsible for trafficking colossal amounts of deadly and illicit drugs into the United States. As alleged in the indictment, he personally oversaw the vicious cartel known as Cartel de las Solas, which flooded our nation with lethal poison, responsible for the deaths of countless Americans, the many, many Americans. Hundreds of thousands over the years of Americans died because of him. Maduro and his wife will soon face the full might of American justice and stand trial on American soil. Right now, they're on a ship. They'll be heading to, ultimately, New York, and then a decision will be made, I assume, between New York and Miami or Florida. But we have people where the overwhelming evidence of their crimes will be presented in a court of law. And I've seen it. I've seen what we have. It's both horrible and breathtaking that something like this could have been allowed to take place. For many years after his term as president of Venezuela expired, Maduro remained in power and waged a ceaseless campaign of violence, terror, and subversion against the United States of America, threatening not only our people, but the stability of the entire region. And you all saw it. In addition to trafficking gigantic amounts of illegal drugs that inflicted untold suffering and human destruction all over the country, all over in particular the United States, Maduro sent savage and murderous gangs, including the bloodthirsty prison gang Tren de Aragua, to terrorize American communities nationwide. And he did indeed. They were in Colorado. They took over apartment complexes. They cut the fingers off people if they call police. They were brutal, but they're not so brutal now. And I just have to congratulate our military, Pete and everybody, and our National Guard, because the job that they've done, whether it's in Washington, D.C., where we have a totally safe city, where it was one of the most unsafe cities anywhere in the world, frankly, and now we have no crime in Washington, D.C. We haven't had a killing. We had the terrorist attack a few weeks ago. A little bit of a different kind of a threat, but we haven't had a killing in a long period of time, 6-7 months. We used to have two, on average, 2 a week in Washington, our capital. We don't have that anymore. The restaurants are opening. Everyone's happy. They're going, they're walking their daughters, they're walking their children, their wives, they walk to restaurants. Restaurants are opening all over Washington, D.C. So I want to thank the National Guard. I want to thank our military. And I want to thank law enforcement. Been amazing. And they should do it with more cities. We're doing it, as you know, and we're doing it in Memphis, Tennessee right now, and crime is down. We've just sort of started a few weeks ago, but crime is down now 77%. And the governor of Louisiana called, great person, and he wanted us to help him, as you know, in a certain very nice part of Louisiana, and we have done that. It was a rough section, and we have crime down. I understand it's down to almost nothing already after 2.5 weeks. New Orleans, it's down to almost nothing, and we've only been there for 2.5 weeks. Can't imagine why governors wouldn't want us to help. We also helped, as you know, in Chicago, and crime went down a little bit there. We did a very small help because we had no working ability with the governor. The governor was a disaster, and the mayor was a disaster. But it knocked down crime. But we're pulling out of there. When they need us, we'll know. You'll know. You'll be writing about it. And likewise, Los Angeles, where we saved Los Angeles early on, where the head of the police department made a statement that if the federal government didn't come in, we would have lost Los Angeles. That's long after the fires. That's when they had the riots in Los Angeles. We did a great job. Got no credit for it whatsoever, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. We don't need the credit. But we'll be pulling out when they need us. They'll call, or we'll go back if we have to. We'll go back. But we did a great job in various cities. But the place that we're very proud of is Washington, D.C., because it's our nation's capital. We took it from being a crime-ridden mess to being one of the safest cities in the country. But the gangs that they sent raped, tortured, and murdered American women and children. They were in all of the cities I mentioned, Tren de Aragua, and they were sent by Maduro to terrorize our people, and now Maduro will never again be able to threaten an American citizen or anybody from Venezuela. There will no longer be threats. For years, I've highlighted the stories of those innocent Americans whose lives were so heartlessly robbed by this Venezuelan terrorist organization. Really one of the worst. One of the worst. They say the worst. Americans like 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungary from Houston. Beautiful Jocelyn Nungary. What happened to her? They, as you know, they kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered by Tren de Aragua animals. They murdered Jocelyn and left her dead under the bridge. There was a bridge that will never be the same to so many people after seeing what happened. As I've said many times, the Maduro regime emptied out their prisons, sent their worst and most violent monsters into the United States to steal American lives. And they came from mental institutions and insane asylums. They came from prisons and jails. The reason I say both, they sound similar. Actually, prisons, a little bit more hostile, a little bit tougher. A mental institution isn't as tough as an insane asylum, but we got them both. They sent from their mental institutions. They sent from their jails, prisons. They were drug dealers. They were drug kingpins. They sent everybody bad into the United States, but no longer. And we have now a border where nobody gets through. In addition, Venezuela unilaterally seized and stole American oil, American assets, and American platforms, costing us billions and billions of dollars. They did this a while ago, but we never had a president that did anything about it. They took all of our property. It was our property. We built it. And we never had a president that decided to do anything about it. Instead, they fought wars that were 10,000 miles away. We built Venezuela oil industry with American talent, drive, and skill, and the socialist regime stole it from us during those previous administrations, and they stole it through force. This constituted one of the largest thefts of American property in the history of our country. Considered the largest theft of property in the history of our country. Massive oil infrastructure was taken like we were babies, and we didn't do anything about it. I would have done something about it. America will never allow foreign powers to rob our people or drive us back into and out of our own hemisphere. That's what they did. Furthermore, under the now deposed dictator Maduro, Venezuela was increasingly hosting foreign adversaries in our region and acquiring menacing offensive weapons that could threaten U.S. interests and lives. And they used those weapons last night. Potentially in league with the cartels operating along our border. All of these actions were in gross violation of the core principles of American foreign policy, dating back more than 2 centuries, and not anymore. All the way back, it dated to the Monroe Doctrines, and the Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Monroe Document. I don't know. It's Monroe Doctrine. We sort of forgot about it. It was very important, but we forgot about it. We don't forget about it anymore. Under our new national security strategy, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. Won't happen. So just in concluding, for decades, other administrations have neglected or even contributed to these growing security threats in the Western Hemisphere. Under the Trump administration, we are reasserting American power in a very powerful way in our home region. And our home region is very different than it was just a short while ago. The future will be, and we did this in my first term. We had great dominance in my first term, and we have far greater dominance right now. Everyone's coming back to us. The future will be determined by the ability to protect commerce and territory and resources that are core to national security. These are core to our national security. Just like tariffs are, they've made our country rich, and they've made our national security stronger than ever before. But these are the iron laws that have always determined global power. And we're going to keep it that way. We will secure our borders. We will stop the terrorists. We will crash the cartels, and we will defend our citizens against all threats, foreign and domestic. Other presidents may have lacked the courage or whatever to defend America, but I will never allow terrorists and criminals to operate with impunity against the United States. This extremely successful operation should serve as warning to anyone who would threaten American sovereignty or endanger American lives. Very importantly, the embargo on all Venezuelan oil remains in full effect. The American Armada remains poised in position, and the United States retains all military options until United States demands have been fully met and fully satisfied. All political and military figures in Venezuela should understand what happened to Maduro can happen to them, and it will happen to them if they aren't just fair, even to their people. The dictator and terrorist, Maduro, is finally gone in Venezuela. People are free. They're free again. It's been a long time for them, but they're free. America is a safer nation this morning. It's a prouder nation this morning because it didn't allow this horrible person and this country that was doing very bad things to us. It didn't allow it to happen. And the Western Hemisphere is right now a much safer place to be. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank General Kaine. He's a fantastic man. I've worked with a lot of generals. I worked with some I didn't like. I worked with some I didn't respect. I worked with some that just weren't good. But this guy is fantastic. I watched last night one of the most precise attacks on sovereignty. I mean, it was an attack for justice. And I'm very proud of him, and I'm very proud of our Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, who I'm going to ask to say a few words. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, can you explain how the U.S. will run Venezuela?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Finally, a commander-in-chief the world respects and the American people deserve. And as the President said, words can barely capture the bravery and the power and the precision of this historic operation. A massive joint military and law enforcement raid flawlessly executed by the greatest Americans our country has to offer. American warriors are second to none, the best in the world and the best of our country. What all of us witnessed last night was sheer guts and grit, gallantry and glory of the American warrior. I'm simply humbled by such men, and I tip my hat to our chairman, Dan Kaine, and all those Americans who stood watch last night. Our warriors are the elite of America, and again, President Trump has your back. No other country on planet Earth, and it's not even close, could pull this kind of operation off. And no other president has ever shown this kind of leadership, courage, and resolve, the most powerful combination the world has ever seen. As the president said, our adversaries remain on notice. America can project our will anywhere, anytime. The coordination, the stealth, the lethality, the precision, the very long arm of American justice, all on full display in the middle of the night. Nicolás Maduro had his chance, just like Iran had their chance, until they didn't and until he didn't. He effed around and he found out. President Trump is deadly serious about stopping the flow of gangs and violence to our country. Deadly serious about stopping the flow of drugs and poison to our people. Deadly serious about getting back the oil that was stolen from us. And deadly serious about reestablishing American deterrence and dominance in the Western Hemisphere. This is about the safety, security, freedom, and prosperity of the American people. This is America first. This is peace through strength. And the United States War Department is proud to help deliver it. Welcome to 2026, and under President Trump, America is back. I'd like to welcome now our chairman, Chairman Kaine, to give a few more details about the operation. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning. Last night, on the order of the President of the United States and in support of a request from the Department of Justice, as the President said, the United States military conducted an apprehension mission in Caracas, Venezuela, to bring to justice two indicted persons, Nicolás and Cecilia Maduro. This operation, known as Operation Absolute Resolve, was discreet, precise, and conducted during the darkest hours of January 2nd and was the culmination of months of planning and rehearsal, an operation that, frankly, only the United States military could undertake. What I'd like to do this morning is talk to you through some of the preparation and the details without compromising any of our tactics, techniques, and procedures. There is always a chance that we'll be tasked to do this type of mission again. Our interagency work began months ago and built on decades of experience of integrating complex air, ground, space, and maritime operations. While the past 2 decades have honed the skills of our special operations forces, this particular mission required every component of our joint force, with soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians working in unison with our intelligence agency partners and law enforcement teammates in an unprecedented operation. We leveraged our unmatched intelligence capabilities and our years of experience in hunting terrorists, and we could not have done this mission without the incredible work by various intelligence agencies, including the CIA, NSA, and NGA. We watched, we waited, we prepared, we remained patient and professional. This mission was meticulously planned, drawing lessons from decades of missions over the last many years, many missions over these last many years. This was an audacious operation that only the United States could do. It required the utmost of precision and integration within our joint force. And the word integration does not explain the sheer complexity of such a mission. An extraction so precise it involved more than 150 aircraft, launching across the Western Hemisphere in close coordination, all coming together in time and place to layer effects for a single purpose: to get an interdiction force into downtown Caracas while maintaining the element of tactical surprise. Failure of one component of this well-oiled machine would have endangered the entire mission, and failure is never an option for America's joint force. Those in the air over Caracas last night were willing to give their lives for those on the ground and in the helicopters. Let me talk a little bit about the preparation. After months of work by our intelligence teammates to find Maduro and understand how he moved, where he lived, where he traveled, what he ate, what he wore, what were his pets, in early December, our force was set pending a series of aligned events. Key was choosing the right day to minimize the potential for civilian harm and maximize the element of surprise, and minimize the harm to the indicted personnel, so as the president said, they could be brought to justice. And as the president said earlier today, weather in Venezuela is always a factor this time of the year. And over the weeks through Christmas and New Year's, the men and women of the United States military sat ready, patiently waiting for the right triggers to be met and the president to order us into action. Last night, the weather broke just enough, clearing a path that only the most skilled aviators in the world could maneuver through. Ocean, mountain, low cloud ceilings. But when tasked with a mission, this organization does not quit. At 10:46 p.m. Eastern Time last night, the president ordered the United States military to move forward with this mission. He said to us, and we appreciate it, Mr. President, good luck and Godspeed. And those words were transmitted to the entire joint force. Over the course of the night, aircraft began launching from 20 different bases on land and sea across the Western Hemisphere. In total, more than 150 aircraft, bombers, fighters, intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance, rotary wing were in the air last night. Thousands and thousands of hours of experience were airborne. Our youngest crew member was 20, and our oldest crew member was 49, and there's simply no match for American military might. As the night began, the helicopters took off with the extraction force, which included law enforcement officers, and began their flight into Venezuela at 100 feet above the water. As they approached Venezuelan shores, the United States began layering different effects provided by Spacecom, Cybercom, and other members of the interagency to create a pathway. Overhead, those forces were protected by aircraft from the United States Marines, the United States Navy, the United States Air Force, and the Air National Guard. The force included F-22s, F-35s, F-18s, EA-18s, E-2s, B-1 bombers, and other support aircraft, as well as numerous remotely piloted drones. As the force began to approach Caracas, the Joint Air Component began dismantling and disabling the air defense systems in Venezuela, employing weapons to ensure the safe passage of the helicopters into the target area. The goal of our air component is, was, and always will be to protect the helicopters and the ground force and get them to the target and get them home. As the force crossed the last point of high terrain where they'd been hiding in the clutter, we assessed that we had maintained totally the element of surprise. As the helicopter force ingressed towards the objective at low level, we arrived at Maduro's compound at 1:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 2:01 a.m. Caracas local time, and the apprehension force descended into Maduro's compound and moved with speed, precision, and discipline towards their objective, and isolated the area to ensure the safety and security of the ground force while apprehending the indicted persons. On arrival into the target area, the helicopters came under fire, and they replied with that fire with overwhelming force in self-defense. One of our aircraft was hit but remained flyable, and as the president said earlier today, all of our aircraft came home, and that aircraft remained flyable during the rest of the mission. As the operation unfolded at the compound, our air and ground intelligence teams provided real-time updates to the ground force, ensuring those forces could safely navigate the complex environment without unnecessary risk. The force remained protected by overhead tactical aviation. Maduro and his wife, both indicted, gave up and were taken into custody by the Department of Justice, assisted by our incredible U.S. military with professionalism and precision, with no loss of U.S. life. After securing the indicted persons, the force began to prep for departure. Helicopters were called in to exfiltrate the extraction force, while fighter aircraft and remotely piloted aircraft provided overhead coverage and suppressive fire. There were multiple self-defense engagements as the force began to withdraw out of Venezuela. The force successfully exfiltrated and returned to their afloat launch bases, and the force was over the water at 3:29 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with indicted persons on board. And both Maduro and his wife were embarked aboard the USS Iwo Jima. In closing, what we've witnessed today is a powerful demonstration of America's joint force. We think, we develop, we train, we rehearse, we debrief, we rehearse again and again, not to get it right, but to ensure that we cannot get it wrong. Our jobs are to integrate combat power so when the order comes, we can deliver overwhelming force at the time and the place of our choosing against any foe anywhere in the world. I am immensely proud today of our joint force and filled with gratitude to represent them here today. There is simply no mission too difficult for these incredible professionals and the families that stand by them and support them. As we stand here this morning, our forces remain in the region at a high state of readiness, prepared to project power, defend themselves, and our interests in the region. This operation is a testament to the dedication and unwavering commitment to justice and our resolve to hold accountable those who threaten peace and stability. In closing, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to the brave men and women who executed this mission. Their courage and tireless commitment to our nation are what makes us strong. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Well, I don't have much to add to what you've heard now, other than the following points. Nicolás Maduro was indicted in 2020 in the United States. He is not the legitimate president of Venezuela. That's not just us saying it. The first Trump administration, the Biden administration, the second Trump administration, none of those three recognized him. He's not recognized by the European Union and multiple countries around the world. He is a fugitive of American justice with a $50 million reward, which I guess we saved $50 million. And
we should make sure.
Yeah, exactly. But
don't let anybody claim it. Nobody deserves it but us.
But I want to be clear about one thing. Nicolás Maduro had multiple opportunities to avoid this. He was provided multiple very, very, very generous offers and chose instead to act like a wild man, chose instead to play around. And the result is what we saw tonight. The other message here is the following. You have a guy, like many people around the world, they like to play games. You have a guy who decides he's going to invite Iran into his country, is going to, do the confiscation of American oil companies, is going to flood our country with gang members, is going to take Americans prisoner and try to hold them for hostage and trade them like he was able to do with the Biden administration. Basically likes to play games all this time and thinks nothing's going to happen. And I hope what people now understand is that we have a president. The 47th president of the United States is not a game player. When he tells you that he's going to do something, when tells you he's going to address a problem, he means it. He actions it. I can tell you, I've watched this process now for 14, 15 years, been around it. Everybody talks, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. When I get there, we're going to do this, we're going to take... This is a president of action. Like, I don't understand yet how they haven't figured this out. And now, if you don't know, now you know. Because this is the way it's going to play out. And I think people need to understand that this is not a president that just talks and does letters and press conferences. And, if he says he's serious about something, he means it. And this is something that was a direct threat to the national interest of the United States, and the president addressed it. There's a president of peace, by the way. I told you what I just said earlier. This guy had multiple opportunities to find his way somewhere else and figure out another. He could have been living somewhere else right now, very happy, but instead he wanted to play big boy. And so now, you know, he's got other sets of problems on his hands. And but I think the message here should be for the world. Look, the president doesn't go out looking for people to pick fights with. He's not, generally wants to get along with everybody. We'll talk and meet with anybody, but don't play games. Don't play games with this president's in office, because it's not going to turn out well. And so I hope that I guess that lesson was learned last night, and we hope it'll be instructive moving forward.
Is that a message for Cuba?
Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Mr. President. Mr. President. Mr. President. Mr. President.
You said that the U.S. is going to run Venezuela. So who's in power right now?
Well, we're going to be running it with a group, and we're going to make sure it's run properly. We're going to rebuild the oil infrastructure, which will cost billions of dollars. It'll be paid for by the oil companies directly. They will be reimbursed for what they're doing, but it's going to be paid. And we're going to get the oil flowing the way it should be. As you know, it was just a minor flow. It was actually a minor flow for what they have. But we're going to run it properly, and we're going to make sure the people of Venezuela are taken care of. We're going to make sure the people that were forced out of Venezuela by this thug are also taken care of.
Mr. President. Mr. President. Mr. President.
Mr. President, does the U.S. running the country mean that U.S. troops will be on the ground? How will that work?
Well, you know, they always say boots on the ground. Oh, so we're not afraid of boots on the ground if we have to have. We had boots on the ground last night at a very high level, actually. We're not afraid of it. We don't mind saying it. But we're going to make sure that that country is run properly. We're not doing this in vain. This is a very dangerous attack. This is an attack that could have gone very, very badly. Could have gone very badly. We could have lost a lot of people last night. We could have lost a lot of dignity. We could have lost a lot of equipment. The equipment is less important, but we could have lost a lot. And we're going to make sure that this is proper. We're there now. We're ready to go again if we have to. We're going to run the country right. It's going to be run very judiciously, very fairly. It's going to make a lot of money. We're going to give money to the people. We're going to reimburse people that were taken advantage of. We're going to take care of everybody. It's very important. We couldn't let them get away with it. You know, they stole our oil. We built that whole industry there, and they just took it over like we were nothing. And we had a president that decided not to do anything about it. So we did something about it. We're late, but we did something about it. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, can you explain the exact mechanism by which you're going to run the country? Are you going to designate a U.S. official to coordinate?
It's all being done right now. We're designating people. We're talking to people. We're designating various people, and we're going to let you know who those people are.
Mr. President.
What's the group you mentioned that would run Venezuela?
Well, it's largely going to be, for a period of time, the people that are standing right behind me. We're going to be running it. We're going to be bringing it back. It's a dead, you know, I talk about a dead country. A year and a half ago, we were a dead country. Now we're the hottest country anywhere in the world. We're a country doing better than any country anywhere in the world. And it required leadership. Venezuela has a lot of bad people in there, a lot of bad people that shouldn't be leading. We're not going to take a chance that one of those people take over for Maduro. So you can look at, and others, we have fantastic people, including people in the military. So we're going to have a group of people running it until such time as it can be put back on track, make a lot of money for the people, and give people a great way of life, and also reimbursement for people in our country that were forced out of Venezuela.
Mr. President.
Rubio would be.
You said earlier today that you weren't going to back Machado to come back and be the opposition leader in your Fox and Friends interview. And then you also mentioned the vice president of Venezuela. Are you going to work with the vice president of Venezuela, or how do you foresee the relationship
going?
I
understand she was just sworn in, but she was, as you know, picked by Maduro. So Marco's working on that directly. He just had a conversation with her, and she's essentially willing to do what we think is necessary to make Venezuela great again. Very simple.
Mr. President, Colombian President Gustavo Petro, a couple weeks ago, he said he's got to watch his ass. And today he said he's not concerned about anything happening to him in the aftermath of this operation. So just what your message is about that.
Well, he has cocaine mills. He has factories where he makes cocaine. And, yeah, I think I stick by my first statement. He's making cocaine. They're sending it into the United States. So he does have to watch his hands.
Mr. President, did you notify any members of Congress in advance?
Marco, do you want to talk about that? Because you were involved in
Sure. We call members of Congress immediately after. This was not the kind of mission that you can do congressional notification on. It was a trigger-based mission in which conditions had to be met night after night. We watched and monitored that for a number of days. So it's just simply not the kind of mission you can call people and say, hey, we may do this at some point in the next 15 days. But it's largely a law enforcement function. Remember, at the end of the day, at its core, this was an arrest of 2 indicted fugitives of American justice, and the Department of War supported the Department of Justice in that job. Now, there are broader policy implications here, but it's just not the kind of mission that you can pre-notify because it endangers the mission.
Mr. President, if I could add one thing to that. Congress has a tendency to leak. This would not be good. If they leaked, General, I think it would have been maybe a very different result. But I have to say, they knew we were coming at some point, you know. We had a lot of ships out there. They sort of knew we were coming.
Mr. President.
But Congress will leak, and we don't want to leak.
Mr. President.
You were one of the only people to watch this all play out live. What was Maduro doing when the U.S. forces entered what I assume would be his home? And also, was there any point where the U.S. was considering if Maduro pushed back or resisted killing Maduro?
It could have happened. It could have happened. He was trying to get into a safe place. You know, the safe place is all steel. And he wasn't able to make it to the door because our guys were so fast. They went through the opposition so fast. And there was a lot of opposition. You know, people were wondering, do we get him by surprise? Sort of surprised, but they were waiting for something. It was a lot of opposition. There was a lot of gunfire. You saw some of it today. But he was trying to get to a safe place, which wasn't safe because we would have had the door blown up in about 47 seconds, they say on average, regardless of how thick the steel was. It was a very thick door. It was a very heavy door, but he was unable to get to that door. He made it to the door. He was unable to close it.
So where is Maduro going to be?
Go ahead, finish.
Where is Maduro going to be in the time being right now? Do you know his exact whereabouts?
Well, eventually, ultimately, in the near future, he's going to be brought to New York.
And where is he going to be held? Where is he going to be held in New York? Do you know?
That's going to be up to the officials that do these things.
Mr. President, the U.S. has something of a mixed track record of ousting dictators without necessarily a plan for what comes afterwards. Did that weigh on your decision?
Well, that's when we had different presidents, but with me, that's not true. With me, we've had a perfect track record of winning. We win a lot, and we win. If you look at Soleimani, you look at al-Baghdadi, you look at the Midnight Hammer. Midnight Hammer was incredible. Right now, you wouldn't have peace in the Middle East. We have essentially peace in the Middle East because of that. If we weren't successful with Midnight Hammer, you wouldn't have peace in the Middle East. So. With me, you've had a lot of victory. You've had only victories. You've had no losses. Yeah.
Mr. President, can you? How long do you expect the U.S. to run Venezuela, and how soon do you want the Venezuelan people to hold elections?
So I'd like to do it quickly, but it takes a period of time. You know, we're rebuilding. We have to rebuild their whole infrastructure. The infrastructure is rotted. It's actually very dangerous. It's blow-up territory. Oil is very dangerous. It's a very dangerous thing to take out of the ground. It can kill a lot of people. It has killed a lot of people doing just that. The infrastructure is old. It's rotted. Much of it is stuff that we put there 25 years ago, and we're going to be replacing it. And we're going to take a lot of money out so that we can take care of the country.
Are you saying that Secretary Rubio and
Mr. President, China, Russia, and Iran have interests in Venezuela. How does this operation affect your relationships with them when it comes to the oil and drugs?
In terms of China and Russia, Russia when we get things straightened out. But in terms of other countries that want oil, we're in the oil business. We're going to sell it to them. We're not going to say we're not going to. In other words, we'll be selling oil. Probably in much larger doses because they couldn't produce very much because their infrastructure was so bad. So we'll be selling large amounts of oil to other countries, many of whom are using it now, but I would say many more will come.
Are you saying that, Mr. President, are you saying that?
Mr. President, thank you. What is your message to the people of Venezuela today? Of course, the civilian population specifically, they have a lot of questions. What is your message to the people of Venezuela?
That you're going to have peace, justice. You're going to have some of the riches that you should have had for a long period of time. It was stolen from you. but you're going to have peace and you're going to have safety, you're going to have justice, you're going to have a country, you're going to have a real country, you're going to have potentially a great country. You know, if you go back 20 years, maybe even a little longer ago, that was a great country, and they destroyed it. Remember I said that if we lose this election, the United States will be Venezuela on steroids. That's what would have happened. Had we lost the election, the 2024 election, we suffered so badly. When you look at the border from 2020, what they did, what Joe Biden administration did to our country should never be forgotten. But if we had to go through another year of that, we would be exactly where Venezuela was in terms of, I used to say, if they win, we're going to be Venezuela on steroids, and that's what would have happened.
President, thank you. Are you saying that Secretary Hegseth and Rubio are going to be running Venezuela, and will you be sending in U.S. military
They're
troops
going to
to
be a
provide?
team that's working with the people of Venezuela to make sure that we have Venezuela right. Because for us to just leave, who's going to take over? I mean, there is nobody to take over. You have a vice president who's been appointed by Maduro. And right now she's the vice president, and she's, I guess, the president. She was sworn as president just a little while ago. She had a long conversation with Marco, and she said, we'll do whatever you need. I think she was quite gracious, but she really doesn't have a choice. We're going to have this done right. We're not going to just do this with Maduro, then leave like everybody else, leave and say, you know, let it go to hell. If we just left, it has zero chance of ever coming back. We'll run it properly. We'll run it professionally. We'll have the greatest oil companies in the world go in and invest billions and billions of dollars and take out money, use that money in Venezuela. And the biggest beneficiary are going to be the people of Venezuela. And also, I can't stress this strongly enough, the people that got thrown out of Venezuela that are now in the United States, and frankly, some want to stay and some probably want to go back. Yeah.
So, Mr. President, what's being done to protect Americans in the country, and were any of the detained Americans
Well, right now they're
rescued
very
last
protected
night?
because nobody's going to mess with us. They're very protected. The people of, and we let them know that you better not touch one of them.
Are you concerned that bad elements of the Maduro regime will remain in place?
Well, we know who they are. We're on them, and they're acting much differently now than they would have acted 2 days ago.
And what can you
okay,
say
wait,
about
behind you, please.
Mr. President, why is running a country in South America America first?
Well, I think it is because we want to surround ourselves with good neighbors. We want to surround ourselves with stability. We want to surround ourselves with energy. We have tremendous energy in that country. It's very important that we protect it. We need that for ourselves. We need that for the world. And we want to make sure we can protect it. Yes, sir. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, is there a message here for Cuba and Diaz-Canel?
Well, Cuba is an interesting case. Cuba is, you know, not doing very well right now. That system has not been a very good one for Cuba. The people there have suffered for many, many years. And I think Cuba is going to be something we'll end up talking about because Cuba is a failing nation right now, very badly failing nation. And we want to help the people of it's very similar in the sense that we want to help the people in Cuba, but we want to also help the people that were forced out of Cuba and living in this country. Do you want to say something about that, Marco, please?
Well, I mean, I just gave you a statement a few minutes ago about, you know, when the president speaks, you should take him seriously. So suffice it to say, you know, Cuba is a disaster. It's run by incompetent, senile men, and in some cases, not senile, but incompetent nonetheless. It has no economy. It's in total collapse. And by the way, you know, they were, you know, all the guards that helped protect Maduro, this is well known, their whole spy agency, all that were full of Cubans. I mean, they basically, it's amazing. This poor island took over Venezuela in some cases. One of the biggest problems the Venezuelans have is they have to declare independence from Cuba. They tried to basically colonize it from a security standpoint. So, yeah, look, if I lived in Havana and I was in the government, I'd be concerned, at least a little bit.
Are you cutting off the oil flow to Cuba from Venezuela?
Well, the president already announced a week ago that anything that's sanctioned, it's sanctioned oil, it's not going to be allowed to get there. So that's an
The answer is yes.
Mr. President.
Is the U.S. aware of the location of opposition leader Machado, and have you been in contact with her?
No, we haven't. No, we haven't.
Mr. President, on Monday.
I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect.
Mr. President, is it possible that the U.S. ends up administrating Venezuela for years? You know,
well, you know, it won't cost us anything because the money coming out of the ground is very substantial, so it's not going to cost us anything.
So the U.S. isn't going to dedicate any money to...
Well, we want safety there. We want to be surrounded by countries that aren't housing all of our enemies all over the world. That's what was happening, and you don't want to have that. But we're going to be rebuilding, and we're not spending money. The oil companies are going to go in. They're going to spend money. We're going to take back the oil that, frankly, we should have taken back a long time ago. A lot of money is coming out of the ground. We're going to get reimbursed for all of that. We're going to get reimbursed for everything that we spend. So it's going to be a very important. This is a very big evening that took place last night. We have to be surrounded by safe, secure countries, and we also have to have energy. Very important. We have to have energy that's real energy, not where they're getting 4% and 5% of the energy out of the ground. You take a look. It was such a disaster. So what's going to happen with Venezuela, I think, over the next period of a year is going to be a great thing. And the people of Venezuela will be the biggest beneficiaries.
Mr. President,
U.S. military.
Mr. President, thank you. What did you last speak to Maduro about when you spoke? And is the U.S.
Well, I don't want to get into the
Venezuela?
conversations, but I did have conversations with him, and I said, you got to surrender. And I actually thought he was pretty close to doing so, but now he wished he did, yeah.
Mr. President, can you explain, you said that Maduro is responsible for drug trafficking. You recently pardoned the former president of Honduras who was convicted on many drug trafficking. Can you explain how these two situations are different? And would you ever pardon Maduro?
I endorsed, as you know, the winning president, the man who won in Honduras. I endorsed the man who won in Chile. I endorsed the man who won in Argentina. And we are doing very well with that whole group. What the man that I pardoned was, if you could equate it to us, he was treated like the Biden administration treated a man named Trump. That didn't work out too well for them. This was a man who was persecuted very unfairly. He was the head of the country. He was persecuted very unfairly. And there are a number of them. And we felt that it was a very unfair situation that happened to him. He's also a party member of the man who won. So obviously the people liked what I did. And one of the reasons that was done is because of the fact that the party in power felt very strongly that that man was treated very badly. I studied it very quickly, and then I studied it in great detail. I went to a lot of the people standing behind me, and they felt that that man was persecuted and treated very badly. That's why I gave him a pardon.
Mr. President, you referenced boots on the ground earlier. Can you just sort of button this up? Do you envision the U.S. military having a presence in Venezuela as the U.S. runs that country?
No, we're going to have a presence in Venezuela as it pertains to oil, because we have to have, we're sending our expertise in. So you may need something, not very much. But no, we're going to be taking out a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground. And that wealth is going to the people of Venezuela and people from outside of Venezuela that used to be in Venezuela. And it goes also to the United States of America in the form of reimbursement for the damages caused us by that country. So I want to thank you all very much. Thank you. Do you have one? Yes, please. You were so nice before. I'm going to give you the final question. Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Mr.
Unless
President.
it's a bad question, in which case I'll go one word. It's about who?
It's about Putin, if you want.
About Putin? Well, that's always nice.
You had a phone.
About Putin.
You had a phone call with him on Monday. Did he talk at all about Maduro? Did y'all talk about this?
No, we didn't.
And
We never spoke about Maduro.
Are you mad at him right now? I mean, there's this
I'm not
intelligence.
thrilled with Putin. I'm not thrilled with Putin. He's killing too many people.
There was that intelligence.
I thought that would be so. I settled 8 1/4 war. You know what the 1/4 was? Thailand and Cambodia. I did it again. They broke out, and I did it in about 5 hours, and I settled it. I'm giving myself 1/4, so I'm up to now 8 1/4. In other words, I settled the war, but then they broke out. They had a pretty bad breakout over the last 4 days. I got them to go back to peace. So I only give 1/4. I thought the easiest one would be, one of the easier ones would be Russia, Ukraine. It's not. And they both have done some pretty bad things. And look, that's Biden's war. That's not my war. But I want to stop the lives. Did you see where last month, 30,000, it was 27,000 the month before. 30,000, mostly soldiers, were killed this last month. 30,000. I want to stop that. You know, I got NATO to pay 5% instead of the 2% that they weren't paying. They weren't paying 2, now they pay 5. And we send them a lot of munitions, we send them a lot of things, missiles and various other things, a lot. And they pay. The United States is not losing money. We're probably making money on that. It's the last thing I care about. I just want to stop all those people. We're losing 25, 30,000 human beings that come from 2 places that are very far away. But if I can stop, because it's something I've been pretty good at doing, deals, I guess. It's all a deal. Life is a big deal. But if I can stop that war and stop 30,000 young people, in addition to the fact that people are being killed in Kiev, people are being killed in other cities throughout, you know, a much smaller number, but they're being killed, viciously killed. So I'm not happy about it. I thought that would be something that would get solved. We have Mr. Witkoff here. I think that we're making progress, but that's a war that should have never happened. If I were president, it would have never happened. Putin says it. Everybody says it. If I were president, that would have never happened. But I inherited that war. That was Joe Biden, Zelensky, and Putin. I came into the situation, and it's a mess. And I will say this. I watched an operation last night that was so precise, that was so brilliant. I mean, it was incredible. If we had our people, like this general, and our people involved, that war would not have gone on very long, that I can tell you.
You told me
that war, to use an old term, that war has become a bloodbath, and we want it to get stopped. Thank you very much.
Concerned a rogue Venezuelan general to take over the country.
Can you talk about your conversation with the Vice President?
All right, you've just been listening to a live news conference with President Trump. I think the headline that a lot of people will be taking away from today after hearing about the capture of Nicolás Maduro is the president at 11:44 this morning saying, "We will run the country," speaking of safe, proper, judicious transitions. At 11:47, doubling down and saying, "We will make the people of Venezuela rich and safe." I want to bring in senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. The first 5 or 6 questions from reporters, as you just heard, were how do you do this? Who's going to be in control? He talked about the men standing behind me. Essentially, will be working with the group until there is a proper transition. Also mentioned that he did hear that the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, was sworn in, and that she echoed that she wanted to work with the Trump administration as they make this transition. Ed, your thoughts?
Oh, Jerika, so many questions unanswered there by the president, and questions that everyone here in Washington, once they get back, Congress certainly will be asking in the coming days. Yes, this was a limited and precise extraction of a leader and his wife to face charges in the United States. But by saying now that the United States is going to, in essence, run or occupy Venezuela until a transition is completed, and the president at one point suggested it could last at least a year, that is a significant new endeavor, and one that's going to require, obviously, military involvement, American funding, a fair amount of political capital and attention spent on a part of the world where the United States is not actively occupied or really engaged in several decades. And so remember, against all of this, our polling has shown in recent weeks widespread opposition to military operations there and a widespread lack of understanding from the White House about why this is necessary. Did the president do enough in this exchange with reporters to explain why it's necessary? We'll see. But there will be all sorts of questions. And the fact that he didn't identify whether it's a civilian or military leadership that will be running the country with the world's largest known oil reserves, and obviously a place that has caused great instability across South America and the Western Hemisphere, opens up all sorts of questions that are yet to be answered and will have to be answered in the coming days. Also notable, he did not endorse the opposition government, essentially, that's been waiting, including Maria Corina Machado, the woman who won that Nobel Peace Prize late last year, saying she doesn't necessarily have the support. That's notable, too, because she, of course, went so far to credit him for that Peace Prize and was crediting him for pushing for these changes. Much more to be answered in the coming days, Jerika.
That's right. He called her a nice lady, but says she doesn't, quote, have the respect.
Exactly.
Ed O'Keefe, thank you. Senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us now. And Charlie, I couldn't help but take away so much from General Dan Kaine, who gave very specific details about the involvement, the 150 aircraft, the 20 different places at 1:01 this morning, saying that they descended into Maduro's compound and that they had him on board the Iwo Jima at 3:29 this morning. What are we to take away from all of the details that we learned about how this happened?
I think it underlines the complexity of what he called a multi-layered attack and extraction. It's called Operation Absolute Resolve. Every component of the joint forces were involved: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, CIA, other law enforcement agencies. As you said, we got to repeat that: 150 aircraft from 20 bases paved the way for those helicopters to come in at around 100 feet as they came in over the sea. They did take fire, both coming in and getting out, engagements as they call them, but everybody returned home safely. So did the aircraft. From the time they reached the Maduro compound until the time the president and his wife were extracted and at sea, roughly 2.5 hours, which is a long time to have U.S. forces in peril. Finally, he underlined that those U.S. military assets, this massive U.S. military buildup, will remain in place for the time being.
All right, Charlie D'Agata, thank you very much. We want to now turn to Elliot Abrams. He was the special representative to Venezuela during the first Trump administration. Elliot, good to have you. What did you make of the news conference?
A lot of surprises, not about the removal of Maduro, but the idea that the Secretary of State was speaking with Maduro's vice president and they hadn't talked to Maria Corina Machado, the leader of the opposition. Then the president went on to say that Maria Corina Machado, the Nobel Prize winner, lacked the respect to run Venezuela. In fact, she and Edmundo Gonzalez got 70% in last year's election. So I don't know where that information is coming to the president from. And we're all, I think, completely up in the air about this question of running Venezuela. What does that mean? Does it mean troops? I don't think so. Does it mean opening the U.S. embassy? Sure. Does it mean cooperating? Sure. But he left it in a situation where I think a lot of Venezuelans are going to be pretty unhappy.
And Elliot, before you go, can you talk to us about Natalie Brand, our correspondent who was there, asked, are you concerned about bad elements? And he said essentially no, referring to the president saying no, because he felt like they were acting differently now after what we just witnessed and showing that picture again of Nicolás Maduro handcuffed and on his way here to New York. But is there a concern that there are still elements from Maduro, whether it is the vice president or his defense ministry who called this an aggressive attack, and that we need to stand firm? What are the repercussions moving forward just because he still has a team there?
Yeah, my fear is not that they're going to fight back against a new government. My fear is that now the United States is going to try to do some deals with those people. They'll be cooperative if we leave them in place and they can continue to steal money and to brutalize the country. So I think that's something we really have to watch carefully. We should not be making deals with those people. They're under indictment. They need to go.
All right, Elliot Abrams, thank you. I want to bring in CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano. You heard those comments. I know you spoke to Machado not too long ago, and he basically said she doesn't have the respect. Also, Lilia, if we could touch on the oil. I mean, here's a president saying this was about drug cartels, but acknowledging that U.S. companies will be coming in, spending billions of dollars, he said, on infrastructure in hopes of making the Venezuelan people rich and also benefiting from that.
Jerika, this is one of the biggest fears of Venezuelans who are in exile or abroad. The people who were expecting this day anxiously and who were expecting that it would be the leader of the opposition, the person who brought that Venezuelan voters, as I saw on election day on the ground in Venezuela, to rise to power, that even though Edmundo González Urrutia is who won that election, because Maria Corina Machado was banned from running, that it would be her who would be working with the United States and who the United States would support. what Elliot was saying, I can't stress how important this is for every Venezuelan who was expecting that a regime change would mean that the opposition would rise to power, how different the scenario would be. That now we're talking about cutting deals with the vice president, with the minister of oil and economy, with the person who is closest to Maduro, Delcy Rodriguez, and how it wasn't about regime change, that it was about the oil. I mean, that could be the narrative that we would start seeing, and the amount of frustration that that could generate among Venezuelans and Venezuelan voters in the United States. That's something we're going to watch very closely. I'm waiting to hear back from Maria Corina's team to see if they have any response to this, but it was quite shocking.
Indeed it was. And to hear again that the administration has been in talks, it sounds like, with Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president there of Venezuela. Again, the president signaling that she is saying early on, at least, that she is willing to work with the administration on their plans. Lilia, thank you. Well, before we leave, we want to make an interesting note here, a coincidence, in fact. On this exact day, 36 years ago, U.S. forces captured another South American leader, Manuel Noriega from Panama. You can see the side-by-side comparison right there on your screen. The man on the left now finding himself in a similar situation. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro in U.S. custody and on the way to New York to face federal charges. President Trump says the U.S. will run Venezuela until a safe transition is possible, and he is not afraid of putting boots on the ground. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7 and on your local news, and Tony DeCopel will anchor a special edition tonight of the CBS Weekend News. This has been a CBS News special report. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Jerika Duncan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lindsay Reiser. You've been watching President Trump and his administration discussing the overnight military operation in Caracas and arrest of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. U.S. forces dropped several missiles on the Venezuelan capital just after 1 a.m. local time, around midnight Eastern. Delta forces went in and took Maduro and